Quartet Generations sings our national anthem. Hats off, please. Thank you.
Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight for the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare of bursting air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave for the land of the free and the home of the brave.
And now to get everybody in the mood for this evening, we think we have one song that will be appropriate to get you started. Yes, it's 1, 2, 3 strikes are out at the old ball game. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out with the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and cracker jack. I don't care if I never get back. Let me root for the home team. If they don't win, it's a shame. For if 1, 2, 3 strikes are out at the old ball game. Yes, it's 1, 2, 3 strikes are out at the old ball game. You're out.
Thank you so much for being here. Again, that's the Barbershop Quartet Generations. If they look familiar to you, they sang at the 100th anniversary of Fenway Park recently. And so we were very, very happy that they could join us tonight. We have many distinguished guests here with us this evening. It is my pleasure to introduce from the Philadelphia Athletics Historical Society, Mr. Dick Rosen.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been studying Connie Mack and working with the Philadelphia Athletics for many years. And it's always a great thing to have a baseball thing like this. I love to talk baseball. We'll be doing a lot of that and we'll be getting audience participation. Baseball, to me, is a whole lot of stories. And everybody's got a story. Everybody's got a way of looking at baseball. They have their favorite uncle, their favorite game, their favorite player. And I always have believed that baseball creates emotional ties with us and family, as well as with the game itself. I'd just like to start off by introducing a couple of people who have stopped in to say hello. Ann Goby, who is the state rep from this area in Massachusetts. And coming all the way from Florida on a non-political visit is former Senator Connie Mack, the third, the grandson of Connie Mack. The senator has agreed to say a few words about himself and about his grandfather, some stories, just to kind of fill us in some of the ways that only he could know Connie Mack. So, Senator, I turn to you.
Dick, I'm not sure a former senator can just say a few words. And some of you have asked me this evening, how long did you play baseball? And my response was, until I found out I couldn't hit a curveball, and that was the end of my career. I would like to share with you some thoughts and a couple of stories. Again, I'm often asked, do you remember your grandfather? My earliest memory of my grandfather when I was a young boy at the age of 5, 1945. I remember being with him on many occasions over the next 10 years. But before I got ahead of myself here, I think the first thing I want to say to you all is how much the McGillicuddy family, the Connie Mack family, appreciates the fact that you would celebrate the 150th birthday of my grandfather. It is very, very meaningful to us. Hopefully tomorrow when we have the parade, that my son and my grandson will be able to join us. He's probably about to get on a plane right now in Tampa to fly up to Boston and then drive over here this evening. If everything works right, he should be with us for the parade and the other festivities during the day. So that's my son Connie, who's Connie the Fourth, and my grandson, who is Cornelius McGillicuddy the Fifth. And my wife came up with the perfect nickname. Instead of Cinco de Mayo, as they refer to it down in Florida, it's Cinco de Maco. As a young boy, I remember my grandfather visiting us in Fort Myers, which of course is where the Boston Red Sox train now. But he would come visit us for 1-2 weeks in the winter around spring training. I do remember going with him and my father to spring training games in Fort Myers or in Bradenton. I do remember one particular time, Norman, where someone asked him on this trip, what was the worst trade that he ever did? And I don't know whether this is going to agree with what you have come up with, but his response was Nellie Fox. He never should have traded Nellie Fox. And I remember the response as to why he traded Nellie Fox is because he said he was too small, and he said, I really didn't think he had the strength and stamina to be able to play 154 games a year. Another memory that I have is that some of the other famous baseball players and managers at the time would come by to see my grandfather, and I would be with him. There's another McGillicuddy that I want to take a moment to introduce. My nephew, Dennis McGillicuddy, who's come join us. Dennis, let's stand up. Dennis's father and I would sit there at the feet of our grandfather and Branch Rickey. And I remember one particular day when Branch Rickey and my grandfather took Dennis, your father, out into the side lot of the house to teach your father how to throw a change-up curve. And if anybody who's trying to change up curve, I think you'll understand why people have bad arms. I mean, it's just an incredible, difficult pitch to throw. There are many stories, but because we have so much to cover tonight, I've tried to be just one or two. To show you how the game of baseball and those who played it and managed it had such an influence around the world. Imagine here I am in, I'm going to say, probably 1996 or 1997. I am on a trip into China. I met with the president of China to talk about issues having to do with Hong Kong and so forth, and then went to Japan and I had breakfast with the Prime Minister. There were about probably 4 or 5, 6 of us in the meeting. And so I'm asking myself, should I mention to the Prime Minister about my grandfather bringing, it really wasn't an all-star team at that point, but it would have been an all-star team if we had designated all-star at that He brought this great baseball team from the U.S. to play the Japanese. This is I'm going to say 33 or 34. Norman tells me 34. 1934. And so I said to the Prime Minister, I said, Prime Minister, this is my first trip to Japan. But my grandfather came here in 1934 and brought with him an American baseball team. The Prime Minister nearly came out of his chair. And he said to me, was that the team with Ruth and Gehrig? And I said, yes, it was. Now think about that. The Prime Minister of Japan, he said, I can't wait to go home tonight and to tell my daughter that you were here and about this team that your grandfather led. And then he said to me, well, you know, the American team won every game. And I said, well, Mr. Prime Minister, I knew that, but I didn't raise that for diplomatic reasons. The other story I would like to tell you, and I got this from the first volume of Norman's book, his History of Connie Mack. And I'm going to tell this story, and you may have to be the cleanup batter and make sure that the facts end up being right. But this is a story that occurred, I believe, 1911, where the A's were playing the Giants in the World Series. The score of the series was 3-1. It's the 5th game. If the A's had won the game, they'd won the World Series, it would be over. The score at the beginning of the 9th inning is 3-1. The Giants score 2 runs in the bottom of the 9th to tie it up. Now, I want you to try to imagine yourself sitting in the stadium at that time, and you're a Giants fan. It's now the bottom of the 10th. You've got, I believe, a man on first and third. A fly is hit into the outfield, and I think it was Doyle. Takes off for home, crosses, and is considered having scored. The fans erupt with an incredible amount of emotion because they now believe that they have just made it 3-2. Doyle failed to tag home plate. The catcher looked to my grandfather and got no signal from him. The on-the-field team captain tried to make his way to the umpire, but by that time, thousands of fans have come on to the field. He didn't appeal the ruling. My grandfather didn't suggest that he should appeal the ruling, and they let it go. Now, I want you to, I'm going to read, and again, Norman, I guess I should stop here as well. We all are so deeply indebted to you for the work, effort, and time, and patience, and persistence that you have put into the background, the life, the history of my grandfather, and a person obviously dearly beloved here in East Brookfield. So we thank you so much for that service. But here is what my grandfather said that night on the train on the way back to Philadelphia as to his reaction. It said it was the most pleasing moment of my life when not one of them, referring to his players, not one of them tried to take advantage of cheap technicality. Lab looked around at the bench to see if I had noticed. I could see him from the corner of my eyes. I did not give him a tumble, and he rushed off the field with the rest. Now, I couldn't swear that Doyle missed the plate, but he did. But if he did, what difference did it make? He had plenty of time to scuttle along, and in my mind, the Giants were fully entitled to it. I'm glad that none of my men forced Clem to make a ruling that would have been a rank injustice to New York, probably precipitating a riot and taking a hard-earned victory from the true winners, and perhaps even giving baseball a black eye. I'm mighty pleased that my team showed themselves as true sportsmen. And so when people ask me about my grandfather, yes, I think about him as the manager of the Philadelphia Athletics, a fellow whose teams won 9 pennants and 5 World Series,
and esteemed for his baseball prowess. But probably the proudest thing about my grandfather is the type of person that he was. And I think to myself, isn't it a shame that we don't have more of his attitude about life and a greater sense of sportsmanship? It could truly change our nation, our communities, and the world. Thank you for celebrating his life, and I'm delighted to be with you.
Now, usually when I do these things, I like to start off with a joke. I have a joke. Guy walks into a bar with a dog. Bartender says, "You can't bring that dog in here. Get him out of here." Man says, "This is a special dog. He can talk." He says, "If you can make this dog talk, I'll give you $100. So the guy puts the dog up on the bar and he says, "What's that thing that's over your house?" And the dog goes, "Roof." And he said, "Okay, what's the thing that goes around a tree? It's on the bar outside of a tree." He says, "Bark." And he says, "Who's Mr. Baseball?" And he says, "Ruth." Bartender gets his bouncer, throws the guy out of the bar. He's walking down the street. He turns to his master and he says, "I guess I should have said Connie Mack." And he should have. And that's what we're going to say tonight. We're going to talk about Connie and his career. We've heard some stories from his grandson, and now we're going to hear stories from his biographer. Norman Muck started a biography of Connie Mack a few years ago. He just told me he doesn't know how many years it was, but he knows he's 27 years older now than he was when he started this. He will continue to do it. They just finished volume 2 of the biography, and hopes to have, will have, volume 3 done in about a year and a half. He is working on that and getting that ready for the publisher now. He will be around tomorrow at the library to sign copies of his book for you. It is a comprehensive book of Connie Mack, the Philadelphia Athletics, and indeed of baseball during that whole period when Connie Mack was in it. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Norman Muck, the biographer of Connie Mack. Norman?
That's the only level surface on this thing. I'm going to start with a personal note in bringing you greetings from Connie Mack's last surviving child. His daughter Ruth, who is 98 years old, and who wanted to be here today, but is not physically able to do so. But she wanted to be remembered to everybody and let them know that she is celebrating with them. And if someone is videoing this, I would request that they see me afterwards, because I told her that if possible, I would see that she got a copy of a video of these proceedings. I'm going to start with a story that has nothing to do with East Brookfield, and then I'll tell you why. I looked for the record books and the ledgers, the financial books of the Philadelphia Athletics for 27 years. And I was told along the line that when the team moved to Oakland, they had been thrown away. So I gave up. Less than a year ago, those ledgers turned up. Somebody had gone to a dumpster outside the Oakland Coliseum, seen them there, thought they looked interesting, took them out, took them home, put them away, and left them all those years. And then they finally turned up on eBay. And some collector bought them. A man who lived in Reno. Well, when I learned of their existence, nothing would stop me from trying to get a hold of them to see them because they were a treasure trove of information I knew. But there is something that did stop me, and that was the man who had bought them. Fortunately, only through the efforts of Senator Mack, I succeeded in borrowing those ledgers, and they were indeed a gold mine of information for portraying accurately the business records and the player transactions and the salaries and the dividends and the profits and losses for everything going back to 1910. And that will greatly enrich Volume 3. It was too late for any of it to get into Volume 2. Now I bring that up because I want to stand here and thank the people of East Brookfield for never throwing anything away. When this journey began, I was living in Connecticut, and it was easy for me to come up often, and Fred Mosso was the head of the Historical Society at that time, and was an enormous help to me. And in those visits, I got to see tax records, birth records, death records, school records, military service records, dog license records, everything pertaining to what life was like for the Mack family and for everybody else living in East Brookfield. And that enabled me to paint what I've been told is an accurate portrait of life in this town in the 1860s and 1870s. And I learned a few other things. I learned what the teacher's pay was, what the curriculum was, and even the signs that were posted in the one-room schoolhouse where Connie Mack went. For example, all standing, walking, or running, or playing on the seats or desks, or wrestling, or scuffling in the schoolroom is positively forbidden. No person, while chewing tobacco, shall spit on the floor of said house or on the seats, desks, or ceilings of the room. Now that gives you an idea of education in that one-room schoolhouse. And I also learned that nothing has changed in education. Because one year the school board's annual report said, specialty has been made of reading, spelling, and writing, studies heretofore too much neglected. Has anything changed? When Connie Mack left school after the 8th grade, he was the tallest boy in town. His nickname was Slats. His legs could no longer fit under the desk. He had worked in summer times and he had worked on weekends before, but he became a full-time worker. He was a hard worker, he was polite, he was pleasant, he was well respected by his employers. When he was 9 years old, he worked summers at the Brookfield Manufacturing Company cotton mill for 25 cents a day. At the end of the first day, he was handed a small green slip of paper with 25 cents written on it. He never cashed it. He carried it with him for most of the rest of his life. I was told by someone when he was in his 90s, this person said that Mr. Mack took out this little green slip and gave it to him. I don't know if that's true, but I believe that he did carry it with him for the rest of his life. Can we have Matt? It's not my Matt. Not Tom. It's behind the house where ConnieMack grew up. It was on the site where our work house is. Across the street from it was an open field that included a ball field and a farm, a vegetable farm, and a farm stand, vegetable stand. ConnieMack worked weekends on that farm, and while he was working at the mill, his lunch times he devoted to playing ball on that field. And one day in the early 1880s, his teammates were able to persuade a major league team to come to East Brookfield to play against their local team. And it was on that field that his team cleaned off the field what he called the Irish confetti, all the junk and the tin cans and whatever. Cleared it off to enable them to play the game on that field. And afterwards, they took up a collection past the hat to pay for the expenses and whatever little extra they could put. Furnace Pond is now Lake Lashaway, right? When ConnieMack married, his wife died 5 years later in 1892, left him with 3 small children. He left his children with his mother. They grew up here, went to school here, they had cousins here, and they would swim in that pond, which I was told by one of their cousins was full of algae and fungi and all kind of yucky stuff you don't want to know. And they were brave enough to swim there. The family name McGillicuddy was shortened, as most McGillicuddies shortened their names, to Mac when he was young. It was not, had nothing to do with newspaper headlines or anything like that. They never changed the name, but they went by Mac. He was a very social young man. He went to the dances, the strawberry suppers, the oyster suppers, the minstrel shows, the theater events, the political rallies, the Cohans who would have their annual end of summer show in North Brookfield. He would go to those. He and George M. Cohan, who were 15 years apart in age, became very close friends. And Cohan died before he did, but for the rest of Cohan's life, they were close, lifelong friends. And as a matter of fact, one of the things I learned about ConnieMack is that everybody he met seemed to become a lifelong friend. And he had them from all walks of life, from Hollywood personalities to teachers, to nuns, to ball players, to park employees, to lawyers, an amazing variety of people who loved him, respected him, and corresponded with him. This man, until he was well into his 90s, answered every letter he received. It didn't matter if you were 7 years old or 77 or anything in between, you got an answer from him. The highlight of his life, he often said, came on July 4th, 1883. That playoff championship game against North Brookfield, that East Brookfield won 2-1 and won back the South Side. More than once, he recalled that in his later years and said, that was just as exciting to me as any World Series I ever won. He was 21 in the spring of 1884, and his pitching teammate in town, Will Hogan, had been signed by the Meriden team in the Connecticut League. And Hogan persuaded his manager to give Connie Mack a tryout. And that's where he began his 67 years in baseball. At Meriden, then at Hartford, then at Washington, he was the fans' favorite wherever he played. He hustled, he had plenty of pep and what they call ginger on the field. He directed his players. He got a watch each year from the fans at the end of the season. He got so many of them, they started giving them away to teammates. Now, what shaped Connie Mack as the man he became? It's tempting to say New England values, small town values, Irish values. But these are stereotypes, and they don't really work, as far as I'm concerned. His father was a wheelwright. Neither his father nor his mother could read or write. They couldn't sign their names. When his father came back from the Civil War, he was a sick and broken man and never worked regularly again for the next 30 years. He was a heavy drinker. He never held a steady job. He kept a running tab at Stevens Tavern. And his daughter-in-law, Annie, used to say that he would go through a snowstorm to get to Stevens Tavern. Now, did this shape Connie Mack? Some of his brothers followed their father's footsteps. Some of them did not. Some of them followed their mothers. She was intelligent, hardworking, industrious, God-fearing, and was very keen as a judge of people. And she passed that on to some of her sons, and Connie Mack was one of them. He learned from her dignity, how to judge people, how to read them, antipathy to alcohol, and stoicism, and patience. And believe me, when he was finishing last every year for 7 years in a row, he needed it. He remained a small-town, neighborly man all his life. Sure, he lived very well in Philadelphia, but he never went what we call uptown. He never went big city. He never high-hatted anybody. He was as courtly and kind with the people who worked in the hot dog stand at Shy Park as he was with presidents and kings. Sitting in a hotel lobby when some players and a lot of managers would hide if anybody that they didn't know came near him, he would stand up and greet anybody, friend or stranger, man or woman, and make them feel that they were the complete center of his attention while he was talking to them. No wonder people loved and respected him all over the country, including people who never knew him. If it's a cliche to say the Irish are hot-tempered, in that respect, he fit the profile. Now, that may surprise you. There were an awful lot of people who believe that Connie Mack was born a tall, white-haired, saintly person. But he wasn't. He had a hot temper when he was young. He would get on players, and when he started to manage, he would get onto the field and argue with umpires. And once in New York, it took two policemen to come out on the field and drag him off. He was not going. When he became a manager in 1894, he couldn't take players who didn't give their all, who made mistakes. He would, after the game in the locker room, he would blow up at them. He couldn't take interference from the owner, and he got it. And the club owner would make trades and not tell it. And he sent off one too many hot-tempered telegrams to the owner, and he got fired. So he went down to the minor leagues, and Milwaukee was then in the Western Association, as he put it, to learn how to manage myself and how to manage men. And he learned. And one of the things he learned was, I gotta stay out of the locker room after the games. So that's when and where he decided, if I don't wear a uniform, I don't have to go in there. So from then on, he wore a suit and tie to manage on the bench for the rest of his days. And never had to go in the locker room. The next day, he could walk it off, cool off, call the player aside, talk to him calmly. And he learned to manage men, and it worked. And it made him the man he was when he went to Philadelphia in 1901 and started the Philadelphia Athletics to open the season 4 months later with no backing, no players, no grounds to play on, no grandstand, and he put it all together, and they opened the season, and in 1902, he won the pennant, and the rest of the story, I'll leave for Dick Wolf. Thank you.
If you go to the Philadelphia Athletics website, it's called the PhiladelphiaAthletics.org, all lowercase letters, all strung together. You see on that a little item called Ask Dick. My picture is right next to that. And people write questions to me about what's going on. What about this? Did Jimmy Fox really hit 58 home runs? Or whatever information they would like. Sometimes it's not even to do with the Philadelphia Athletics, but with anyone else. Now what I do, sometimes I'll go in and do a little research and try to come back with an answer. But often I will make send an email to Norman Mach, which makes my job so much easier. And I get the right answer and I get it fast. Last summer I was in Oakland. I was talking to a guy named Steve Vucinich, who is the equipment manager of the Oakland Athletics. He has been with the Oakland Athletics since 1967 when they moved from Kansas City. Steve asked me a question. He's kind of the resident historian there, and he knows everything about every player who ever played in those World Series teams of the Oakland A's in the 70s and right on down. Has not missed a day of service to the Athletics. And he asked me, am I the second longest longevity with the athletics organization in history? Connie Mack, he knew, was first. He had 54 years, and you might even say more. But he was trying to find out if he's number two in terms of service Sounded like a good possibility. He was there 44 years now, 45 years at the end of the season. I wrote to Norman and I asked him the question. Norman came back within one day with a peanut vendor who had served from 1905 to 1940 and then hung around for a few extra years. And Norman wasn't quite sure whether he was still on the payroll, but he was there about that many years. Another guy who was a business manager who said was supposed to have retired in a certain year and hung around and kept watching the turnstiles go around, kept moving the turnstiles for a few years after that. I told Steve, we're working on it, but we've got two possibilities. And it's a good possibility you will be, and if you hang around another year or two, which he has done, and he probably will be the number 2 person in the A's organization from longevity. Now I'm going to talk about what happens in 1901. As Norman says, Connie Mack comes to Philadelphia. I'm having a little problem. A picture of young Connie around that time. This is the story of the Western League. Norman mentioned he was with the Milwaukee Brewers in the Western League. He was the manager and the owner of the Western League. Ben Johnson decided he wanted to make his league major league. How do you make a major league? You say, we're a major league. If the National League didn't like it, they could fight him on it. He was able to get players who, one of the problems, of course, was this reserve clause, so a player wasn't allowed to negotiate his salary. He had to come back to the same team and maybe negotiate it then, but he couldn't play for any other team in the league. If you have a new league, there are no rules. In 1900, this new league, the Western League, changes to the American League, and Connie Mack is sent to Philly to get a team. Johnson wanted to compete with certain established teams, like the Phillies, and so Connie was sent here. What do you need to do? He has nothing. He doesn't have any players. He doesn't have anything. The only thing he has is money given to him by a coal baron in Cleveland named Charles Summers, and he comes to Philly. He finds somebody who's willing to invest. Ben Scheib, a partner in the Reach Sporting Goods Company. Al Reach actually had owned the Phillies for a while. He was kind of being phased out at this time, getting older. And Ben Scheib was his partner. Ben Scheib has developed a way to cut the leather for baseballs and was able to actually run faster or make baseballs much more efficiently. And he said, look, I'd like to invest in a team. And if you let me invest in a team, my condition would be you have to use my baseballs. No problem. So they put together a package. The package consisted of Ben Scheib, who owned 50%, Connie, who earned 25%, and he actually invested, as far as we know, Norman may be able to correct me, there's somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 of his own money in this. He was always seemed to have a little bit of money that he could invest and was willing to take risks in these new ventures. And 2 newspaper reporters, Frank Huff of the Inquirer and Butch Jones of the Associated Press, filled out the other 25%. Huff and Jones' job was to get people, find out who's around. Let's kind of do the Philadelphia baseball scene, because Connie didn't really know it that well. He had to find players. Who does he find? Well, if you know the name of Larry Lajoie, it would be a good choice to have. He was playing for the Phillies. He was earning $2,600 a year. $2,400 was the limit in the National League at that time. So it means he was being paid $200 under the table. His partner, his teammate Ed Delahanty, was being paid $500 or $600 under the table. And Lajoie found out that Delahanty was making more money than him. Connie Mack makes him an offer he can't refuse. I'll give you $4,000 a year. Well, that's a 50% plus raise. Lajoie decides that was a good idea. He jumps to the A's, signs the contract. There's some legal problems that will ensue from this, but Lajoie hits a mere .426 that year in the first year with the Athletics, and goes on to a career, of course, that makes him one of the early entries into the Baseball Hall of Fame. He has to go to Cleveland for legal reasons because they were always afraid that if he played in Philadelphia, they might have an injunction against him. But he goes on to a great career. Another person that we want, and we need a pitcher, and Rube Waddell is around. Now, Waddell was a strange character. My wife, who is a social worker, has branded him with a pervasive personality disorder. He was a very strange guy. He had the mind sometimes of a 15-year-old. He wrestled alligators, apparently, at spring training. He was always running away from the game. I recently got a letter from a guy who said, my grandfather's job back in 1906 and 1907 was he would sit on the bench and Connie Mack would summon him to go across the street to Kilroy's Bar. This is not the Shibe Park, but the old park at 29th and Columbia. And he would rustle up Rube Waddell when he wanted him to get into the game. Waddell had 349 strikeouts in 1904, which remained as a record until Sandy Koufax broke it, and of course even later Nolan Ryan broke that record. Remarkable pitcher, just a little bit off base. It is said, and Norman may contradict me on this, that Connie Mack made sure that Waddell's wife got money whenever he was paid. She sent him money. Connie sent her money to make sure that he would be turned over to her. That's, again, this idea of his generosity and his understanding of the human condition. Here's your 19-1As, the first team. This is what they look like. It looks like a pitching staff on a modern team. There doesn't seem to be enough guys to be a whole team, but this was it. Pitchers were kind of being used almost every day. This team finished okay. It finished fourth, had an over 500 record. The other thing they needed, baseball field. Where do you find a baseball field? Well, this is where Huff and Jones came in. They were able to know where the baseball fields were. There were several possible baseball fields in North Philadelphia, and Huff and Jones helped them out to this one at Columbia Park, which is at 29th and Columbia. If any of you know Philadelphia, it was called Brewery Town. It was where many beers were made. It's always interesting that Connie Mack played in Brewery Town. He had his first ballpark, but he never had a beer sign in his ballpark ever. Absolutely forbade all kinds of advertising. If you can imagine that in today's ball games, no advertising at all. Shibe Park did not have a sign for anything until the Phillies moved in and took it over in 1954. Connie never allowed it. Well, here's Columbia Park. Columbia Park, they now have a 10-year lease on this park. It is built by someone else. It's not owned by them, but they have a lease on it. And Connie says, and his partner Ben Shibe says, how are we going to use this? We got a baseball season. We just finished our first baseball season. And so in that year, he gets a soccer team. Connie buys a soccer team. In fact, he has interest in a couple of soccer teams in Philly. This is just an article from the Inquirer of that time. That 500 people actually visited this. It was on Thanksgiving Day, 1902, and people came to see this. And they continued to play on this thing. This field had to be used not just for baseball, but whatever. It was a kind of something that enabled them to make ends meet as they went through the years there. 1902, the A's win their first pennant. Unfortunately, of course, the American League and the National League could not agree on anything, so there was no World Series. First World Series not until 1903 when the Red Sox played the Pirates. 1904, John McGraw decided he didn't want to play the Red Sox. He said, I can't lower myself to play the team in the American League. He hated Van Johnson. He hated the American League, all kinds of personal reasons. And so no World Series was played in 1904. Well, and also, this is why I almost forgot this. There was a football team that Connie Mack owned. Entrepreneur of the highest order here. There's a football team. There were actually a three-team league, and they called themselves the NFL, not related administratively to the modern NFL, but at least they had three. Christy Mathewson played for a Pittsburgh team. There were two teams in Philly. They kind of played a round robin. Nothing was settled because one team lost all three games and the other were 2-1, and then they had a playoff and that was a tie. So we have no idea who was a better team. Connie decided it was not a good idea to play football. He was was watching Rube Waddell, 6'2", 250-pounder, go through the line. And he just had no idea how tough the line could be, especially without any equipment, as you can see. And so he decided football was not something he wanted to dabble in, not at his expense. And so he stopped this after that year. But notice how he's using this ball field. By 1905, they had won the pennant. They didn't win the World Series, but they got to play against John McGraw's Giants. John McGraw hated the American League, and he did everything he can to thwart it. It was John McGraw who, when he was asked about the athletics, he said, because of the way they put their team together, a little bit from here, a little bit from there, kind of big borrowing, stealing, he called them a bunch of white elephants. When Connie heard that, he said, that's it. I like that, and he calls himself the White Elephants. In this first World Series, you'll notice this is Columbia Park from the side. You'll notice that the guy in the white uniform, that's the A's guy, and there are a couple of guys in the black uniform there. This is John McGraw's Giants. They're celebrating. They're celebrating the death of Connie Mack's athletics. In fact, in this thing, they took a little elephant and they put it on John McGraw's hat when they were at the center. Connie, of course, never delivered the lineup because he wasn't allowed on the field without a uniform, and so he actually didn't participate. Here's a picture. This is a 1911 picture, but it's the same thing when the two got together in 1911. McGraw's still mourning. Only this time, he stops mourning fast because he loses the World Series. Now, the first World Series the A's were in was a fascinating World Series. 5 shutouts were pitched. 3 of them by Christy Mathewson, who unfortunately for Connie and the A's played for the Giants. Chief Bender pitched one, and then Iron Joe McGinnity pitched the 5th one, and so that there were 4 games to 1, the A's lost, but every game was a shutout. Hasn't happened, 3 shutouts has not been one match. Now, by 1909, things were beginning to happen. The A's were successful for these years, and they wanted to start building a new field. This, of course, is Shive Park, which is the first of a series of concrete and steel ballparks. Those of you around here recently witnessed the celebration of the 100th anniversary of Fenway. Fenway was all part of these things. Forbes Field soon after Shive Park. And then, of course, culminating in 1923 with Yankee Stadium. If you look at this park, it is in French Renaissance style. Now, you find me a ballpark today that has either the word French or Renaissance in it, and I would like to see it. Cookie cutter is an adjective that we kind of use for ballparks in the 20th century. They're getting a little nicer, but that period this is a wonderful park. You walk into this, as a kid, I walked into this stadium, and I was just overwhelmed by that tower. You could look up at that tower, and then you walked onto the field, and I didn't believe grass could be so green and so well kept as that was. It has had an emotional effect on me ever since. I just can't forget that experience. They won the World Series the following year, 1910, beat the Chicago Cubs. This is the first of Connie Mack's 5 World Series wins. He had 9 championships. The one in 1902, he didn't get to the World Series, but the others he did. Here we go. They beat the Cubs 4-1 in 1910. 1910 also started a thing in Philadelphia, which were the rooftop seats. There were seats across 20th Street. In 1910, people started to sit up there. World Series game, hard to get a ticket for, so you went up and these people opened their houses, literally opened their house. Opened it in every sense of the word. Not only did they open the doors, but they took the skylights off their bathroom so that you could climb up through the bathroom and go and get on the roof. It got better, or worse, for Connie, over the years. 2,000 people apparently lived here. I just talked to a guy who actually lived there. He's a 92-year-old guy named Joe Rooney. And Joe Rooney father lived in about the middle of that block, and Joe's job was to go out, run to the corner store and get hot dogs and get sodas and whatever, bring them back. Probably charged. He said he charged twice as much as the store charged, and he made at least a little profit. This was clearly well planned because the civil engineer had to understand that this place was going to fall down when you put 2,000 people on that roof that didn't have support. There's a 500-foot sign you can see out there. One more picture. This is Philly was famous for this. This was the route from home plate out. You can see here. You can see the wall. This is a 12-foot. This was a 12-foot wall. There's the people in what they called up here the box seats. That was the seats for the bedrooms. And then if you got through the skylight into the top, Now, of course, this was okay for a while, but after the 1931 World Series, when the economy was starting to go down, and Connie Mack discovered, it's not good because I'm losing, more people are sitting over there than are coming into my park. And so he put up a fence. He put up a green monster. I always thought the green monster was a Philadelphia thing. I never knew about Fenway Park's green monster. He put it up, and he actually, it went from center field to right field, 42-foot high fence. Actually, he was sued by the people on the street saying that they blocked their view. He did block their view. Now, if it was Grand Canyon sitting on the other side, you might have a real good legal fight. But it was a baseball game, a free baseball game, and he wasn't about to give people free baseball games after that. This is an infield called the $100,000 infield. It's sort of, they never made anywhere near $100,000. But it's like saying, you know, how do you feel? It says, I feel like $1 million. Well, this infield felt like 100,000 because this was deflated prices. These are Hall of Famers here. This was an infield. Nowadays, $100,000 will buy you a utility infield for about 2.5 months, whereas these guys didn't even make anywhere near it. 1911, they won another championship. Beat the Giants 4-2. This was Connie's revenge on John McGraw. John McGraw wore black again, but didn't matter. They beat the Giants again in 1913. They missed 1912, but in 1913 they beat the Giants again. In 1914, unfortunately, they were the first team to be swept in the World Series by a lowly team from Boston known as the Braves. The Braves were in last place in the middle of June and finished 10.5 games ahead in the National League. In this picture, we see Honey Fitzgerald. That's Rose Fitzgerald, Rose Kennedy's father, who had wanted to buy the Red Sox, and was part of this group. It was called the Royal Rooters. They used to dominate the games at Fenway. The Red Sox were in the World Series many times during that time, Honey Fitz wanted to buy it. Had Honey Fitz been able to buy them, there may have been no Charles Frazee and no Curse of the Bambino, but Van Dodson didn't like Honey Fitz too much. Yeah. Okay, I want to talk just briefly about how do you go from the high to the low. In 1916, after coming off these World Series players, they hit their lowest point, worst team in modern baseball history. They won 36 and lost 117, making even the 62 Mets look good. The Mets had won 40 and lost 120. And now it was time to rebuild. And probably the genius of Connie Mack was the fact that he could rebuild, and he was able to take the time, and he was able to look out for players. He used to have tryouts every day. I just want to we'll stop in a minute. I just want to tell the story. I think Jimmy Dykes used to say when he came to a game that he always wanted to introduce himself. It may be apocryphal, but he said, I want to introduce myself to the players because none of the guys I'm playing with in the infield were there yesterday. And I suspect that none of us will be there tomorrow. So he always wanted to know who was playing. You could go in for a tryout for Connie if you were a local kid, try out. If he liked you, he may even, since the team was not doing well anyhow, put you in the game. Okay, We need to take a break here. I will concede the microphone here, much as difficult as it is. They're going to do I think they're going to do a raffle right now, and I turn the program back.